Thousands of refugees hoping to reach the United States have been left stranded in various parts of the world after the State Department confirmed all such travel had been halted. The US refugee admissions program was suspended by an executive order signed by Donald Trump on Monday in one of his first acts as president. With more, here's Jean Lance-Rees, co-director at the University of South Carolina's Gould School of Law Immigration Clinic. Hello to you, Jean, and thank you for joining us. So what's your reaction, firstly, to this executive order?
Well, I think suspending the people who are waiting in the refugee program is pretty devastating. A lot of the people whose flights were canceled have already been fully vetted. They have been connected with resources in the U.S. Many are probably reuniting with family members and have waited years for the opportunity to come to the U.S. Through the refugee program. So this is probably going to be challenged. The manner in which it was canceled and the justification for it can be canceled. But generally, the president has very broad authority to suspend the entrance of certain individuals if it's in the public interest of the security of the U.S.
So how many people, can you give us an idea of how many people would be affected in this way?
I think there's about 200,000 people who are already in, the so-called refugee resettlement pipeline. So these are people who have already applied, been found to be facing persecution or experienced persecution on account of a protected ground in their countries and have been, cleared to come to the U.S. This year, the U.S. resettled approximately 100,000 refugees. This is different than asylees, but asylees and refugees have to prove the same thing regarding persecution on account of a protected ground.
So what's going to happen to those people now?
Well, they're stranded. So many refugees are coming from refugee camps where they've spent many years, or they're living in exile in another country. This is going to affect a lot of people from Afghanistan, from Syria, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, from Venezuela, who are basically waiting in limbo in refugee camps or in, unstable places outside of their country, waiting to be resettled in the U.S.
So there are legal challenges to several of Donald Trump's executive orders that have or are expected to be filed with the courts. You say you expect a challenge to this particular executive order?
I do. I expect there'll be a challenge to the president has this broad authority, but it has to comply with the law, with immigration laws. We saw the same kind of challenge under the Trump versus Hawaii during the travel bans. And also the president has to follow certain procedures when announcing something that affects such a large group of people under U.S. law.
So were advocacy groups expecting Donald Trump to do this, Jean, once he was declared the winner of the presidential election? Were asylum groups expecting that he would make good on his campaign promise to clamp down on refugees as quickly as he has?
There was an expectation of, for example, a closure at the border, a suspension of refugee. I don't know that the expectation was it would happen this quickly. And I think some of the statements made by President Trump have kind of been, for lack of a better phrase, all over the place. So while I do think people were preparing and anticipating, I think the suddenness of the refugee program is surprising that, flights are being canceled already.
Yeah. And have refugee groups in the US then been trying to get as many people as possible into the US ahead of the new administration taking office?
I think in general, a lot of U.S. immigration laws that provide humanitarian relief or benefits to people, there was a big push to try and come to the U.S. and remain in the U.S. before January 20th.
Yeah. So what is the criteria now for refugees to be allowed into the country?
Well, it's unclear. Refugees are admitted pursuant to U.S. law that gives the criteria, and only an act of Congress can change what the criteria is for a refugee. It's borrowed directly from the International Protocol on the Refugee for the Convention of Human Rights. But the executive order is unclear on what, if anything, would be a new criteria. It says that there can be some approval on a case-by-case basis, but this is a total suspension. And really only an act of Congress can change the definition of a refugee because that's enshrined in U.S. law.